What's up, guys? It's Toad back with you as usual. It is Monday, January 20th. It is college football championship day. It is Donald Trump Day, Inauguration Day, and much less importantly, it is MLK Day, I guess. But that's not the reason why we have the day off, right? It's definitely not the reason I have the day off in my own mind, at the very least. We're going to talk about all these sports that are going on today. We got some afternoon action in college basketball, NBA, and I think NHL as well. All have afternoon games, if I'm not mistaken. So I got to get through all of these. Yeah. NBA starts at noon. NHL and college basketball start at 1 Eastern time. So we'll get into it in a second. Yesterday, quick recap, 2-0-1. Kind of feel like I should have gone 3-0. The Philadelphia Eagles, man. Yeah, I know you could argue they got outgained by the Rams. I don't know by how much, but Philadelphia, I mean, if you watch that game, they had control of that game pretty much the whole time. And, I mean, they scored an opening touchdown, but right away they missed an extra point. Jake Elliott not able to kick extra points in the snow, apparently, and the NFL moving back the extra point. A little bit ridiculous, in my opinion. And then he missed another one later. And, of course, they wound up pushing on the 6 that I had. So hopefully if you guys are listening to me on that one, you didn't lay 6.5, even though I wouldn't blame you if you did, because, I mean, 7 is really the key number there. And it comes down to if Jake Elliott hits one of those 2 extra points that he misses, if he doesn't miss both of those, then you're going to get it. And then there was another play in the game where they had Philadelphia had a drive that should have been a touchdown drive, I think in the third quarter, maybe it was early fourth quarter, where they got all the way down. Saquon Barkley looked like he got into the end zone. I think the initial call was that he got in. He didn't. It was very close, but he didn't get in. So they were down at the 1-inch line, and I believe it was fourth down. But you know what Philadelphia's going to do? They're going to tush push. So there's a pretty decent chance they're scoring a touchdown there. And if they don't, I mean, the Rams are going to be snapping it basically from in their own end zone. But then what happens? Philadelphia goes for the tush push, and they false start. And then they kick a field goal on that one. So they took a touchdown off the board with that. There were many opportunities for Philadelphia to cover that one. Extremely frustrating. And then in the other game, very misleading score in the Baltimore-Buffalo game. If you look at the stats in that game, it looks like total domination from Baltimore. Baltimore had 410-something yards, something in that range. And Buffalo only had 250. Josh Allen, no touchdowns, no interceptions, but no touchdowns and like 100-something yards. Just, I mean, he really didn't do much at all. I mean, I guess arguably he didn't have to, but that was because the Baltimore Ravens threw the game away in so many different ways. They had a fumble early in the game that cost them, which I think was when they were driving, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe the interception was. I can't remember, because they had an interception in there as well. One of those was when they were on Buffalo's side of the field, I'm pretty sure. So that took some away. They had another drive where they got down. Looked like they were going to score a touchdown, and some penalties set them back, and they had to kick a field goal to cut it to 4 instead of tying the game. Then, of course, we know what happened in the second half. Baltimore scored a touchdown after they'd cut it back to 8, went for the 2-point conversion, which would have tied the game, and they missed on the 2-point conversion, which was one of 2 that they missed in the game. So then they're down 2. They give up a field goal. They're down 5. Buffalo did almost nothing in the entire second half. Buffalo scored, I think 6 points in the second half. So Baltimore then has the ball. They're driving in the middle of the fourth quarter, past midfield. They get this pass over the middle. If you guys saw it, you know what I'm going to say. To Mark Andrews, who is the fall guy in this game, and probably rightfully so. He catches a nice pass over the middle, wide open, starts running with it. Baltimore's moving. They're past midfield. They're only down 5. They're looking like they're going to try to take the lead in the fourth quarter here. And he fumbles the ball and loses it after Baltimore had all that momentum. Absolute killer. Then even after that, Baltimore got the ball back again, down 8 again, because they gave up one more field goal. And then had the chance at the end. They got the touchdown at the end, needed the 2-point conversion to tie it, and somewhat likely send it into overtime at that point because there was about a minute left. I mean, I guess it's possible Buffalo would have been able to get into field goal range, but they get the touchdown, and then what happens, you know if you saw it. I mean, it was one of the highlights of the game. Nice play call on the 2-point conversion. Lamar Jackson rolled out to his right, had Mark Andrews open in the end zone, fine pass. Andrews looked like he had the catch. I thought he had it, and it looked so much like he caught it. The announcers were like, he caught it, it's tied. He dropped the ball in the end zone. It was like a short catch. It was a catch that you got to make. I mean, you can blame, I guess, the snow if you want, the slippery conditions. They were not as crazy as they were in Philadelphia yesterday. But that's just so bad, man. And as the announcer said, like, more than 99% of the time, he's going to make that catch. It's just crazy. And as I pointed out, though, before the game, if you look at Hard Knocks in season, because they're following the NFC North, their schedule had this week's upcoming episode as the last episode of the season. So I'm like, is this whole thing rigged? Like, because basically I think in the Hard Knocks in season, they just follow the team until they're eliminated. So it's like, how do they know this is the season finale this week? How do they know that the Baltimore-Buffalo game is the last game that the AFC North is going to play? There's something real sketchy about that. It messes with my mind. I still thought Baltimore was the right side in that game. The market indicators were such, even though I know there were professionals disagreeing with me on the other side. The line moved up on Baltimore. Baltimore dominated the game statistically, like I said, -3 in turnovers, just horrendous. And even with all that, they had multiple chances to win that game otherwise. Very frustrating. And yeah, the line moved up a little bit more on the Ravens before game time, up to 1.5. And it looked like the percentages were such that the public was more on the Buffalo side. So very frustrating. Let's look at today. Yes, it is college football championship day. I will give you my opinion on the side and total in that game, but I'm not going to be playing the game. So you can be mad at me if you want. I mean, you guys can have action on it if you want. Maybe I'll give you some recommendations as far as what I think are kind of the better ways to play it, and they're maybe a little bit more under the radar ways to play it. Let's look at college basketball first, even though I know NBA starts first, but there's only one game at noon, and I'll still get to it before then. I'm not going to take an hour and a half this time, I don't think. This is mostly like lower conference games here for college basketball. We got Northeast Conference happening, Ivy, Southland, and SWAC, a lot going on. But then we do have a few like Big East, Big Ten, couple of games in a couple of the bigger conferences, which I will hit those. I will say I lean to Princeton against Columbia. You know me and my anti-Columbia stance here, where Columbia got me when I played Yale. Yale just put themselves in a massive hole to start out that game, and then Yale dominated the later parts of that game, but still weren't able to get the cover in that one for me. Columbia still losing, and still that was a brutal loss for Columbia because Yale is still probably the best team in the Ivy, and they're the team that won the Ivy last year. And Columbia was winning that game for more than half of it, and then they wound up blowing the game and losing. And by the way, Yale was winning this game by 9, winning by 10 with 2:25 left. So Yale could have covered for me. Even after all that, they were covering right near the end of the game, and then it didn't happen. So isn't that just great? But Columbia having that close call against Yale, now they have to turn around, go on the road against Princeton. I think it's going to be difficult, man. I just don't think Columbia is good enough to handle back-to-back games against the top Ivy teams like this. With Yale and Princeton are the top 2 teams in the Ivy, I would have to say still, which has been the case for the last couple of years, really. So I don't know that they're going to have that much left in the tank. Yes, they will show up and try to be focused, but I think Princeton should cover this. And Princeton's laying 7.5 at home, which is less than what Yale was laying on the road. So Oddsmaker's telling you Yale is actually a little bit better than Princeton. But Princeton, they got some nice momentum right now. I mean, I know they haven't had any huge wins in this role that they've been on, although they beat Rutgers, who is a Big East team, or excuse me, a Big Ten team. So that's not that horrible, really. Did they used to be Big East? I don't remember. Maybe they did. My mind is like years in the past right now. Man, I'm too old. But yeah, that was still a decent win, even though I don't think Rutgers is that good. Beating Akron's not bad either. I mean, they're a good MAC team. And then Princeton has just rolled in the first couple of Ivy games that they played since official conference play has started. So I like Princeton in this one if I was going to play a side here. Princeton actually down from 7.5 to 7, so you can actually get a better number on that right on the key number 7 there. 56% of the tickets and 79% of the cash on Princeton, so it does look like the cash percentage is actually on them. That is the way that I would look in that one. And 7 is a key number, by the way. If you don't listen to me talk about basketball, it's because it's the it's a 3-score lead, so it's the point where the team that's losing will stop intentionally fouling once they're down by 3 possessions. What else is there to even talk about? I just think it's hilarious, though, that Jackson State, I mean, this might be their first conference loss because they're having to go on the road to Texas Southern, and Texas Southern is the somewhat better team at a 4.5-point favorite here. But it's hilarious that Jackson State started out the season 0-13 in out-of-conference play. Now they're 4-0 in conference play in the SWAC. It's been such a discrepancy between the teams they played out of conference. They had maybe the most difficult out-of-conference schedule in the entire nation. I mean, look at this crazy schedule. I mean, I pointed it out before. It's just hilarious. Houston in there, Kentucky, Iowa State. And, like, even the lesser teams they faced were all better teams in their conferences. And then, they faced Cal Baptist was, like, the least of all the teams that they faced, which is pretty insane. And then once they started SWAC play, they've reeled off 4 wins in a row. This might be where it comes to an end here in a second straight road game, but still, Jackson State just hilarious. Looking at, like, how different these teams are in college basketball. Like, college basketball does have a lot of parity, men's college basketball, but still, when you're talking about, like, one of the least of all the conferences, maybe the very lowest conference, it's either SWAC or, I guess, the Northeast Conference. It's one of those two. When you're looking at those versus, like, the top echelon teams, there is obviously a huge gap there. So it's just, I don't know, it's pretty hilarious looking at what Jackson State's schedule has been so far. No play for me on that. New Mexico, they're hosting Fresno. I mean, it's going to be a difficult spot for Fresno to have to go into the pit, but I don't think it's a great spot for New Mexico because they bounced back nicely after that loss at San Jose State, which I was on, by the way, because it was a sandwich between San Diego State and Boise. They wrecked Boise coming out of that, and I mentioned I liked New Mexico to bounce back in that one. They did. Now they got a second straight home game after that big win, and then after this they got UNLV and Utah State up next, which are bigger games, so possible they overlook Fresno, but Fresno is so bad that Fresno may still just not have enough to hang in this game. Fresno did just finally get a win in conference against Air Force, probably the worst team in the entire conference, but still, that'll give them a little bit of confidence at the very least. But New Mexico's up from 20.5 to 21.5. They do have 60% of tickets on them, but 94% of the cash on Fresno. So maybe indicative of some market agreement there with me, but I'm not going to play that. And then we got the bigger conference games here. Georgetown is at Villanova, and this is, if you look at the line, the odds makers are kind of telling you something. Villanova is up from 7.5 to 9 in this one, although they do have 58% of tickets on them and 74% of the cash over on the other side on Georgetown. So even though the line has moved up on Villanova, it looks like some of the money might actually be coming in on Georgetown. On first glance, I mean, the public is going to think this line looks way too high, right? Like, how is Villanova laying 9.5 when their overall record is actually slightly worse than Georgetown's? Although Villanova's conference record is better, odds makers are telling you Villanova is the significantly better of these two teams. Georgetown, although they've been hot, they're not totally for real yet. They're starting to turn it around, which is good, but struggling a little bit in conference play as of late. But Villanova, I mean, do you really want to lay that many points with a Villanova team that plays really, really slow? I don't know. It's going to be difficult for Villanova to get over a number like that, to cover a large number like that with the style that they play, even though I know they play really efficient offensively this year, but they still play really slow. Georgetown is off that hideous loss to DePaul, where I thought Georgetown was going to smack DePaul after DePaul basically took Marquette to the wire. I thought it was a terrible spot for DePaul. Georgetown absolutely did not get it done, and there were some weird things going on in this game. DePaul shot 46.7 from 3 to Georgetown's 27.3. I mean, Georgetown won the turnover battle, won the rebound battle, so it's like, what the hell happened in this game? Like, how did Georgetown lose this game? It doesn't make any sense. Well, then you look at the free throws, 28 free throw attempts for DePaul and 11 for Georgetown. I think I had mentioned that when I was unfortunately analyzing this game. I mean, it's just ridiculous, the free throw discrepancy in this game. I just don't even understand it, because Georgetown, I think, had more points in the paint and more rebounds. They had way more possessions. They had 65 field goal attempts to DePaul's 44. Statistically, it looks like it should be a blowout win for Georgetown in this game. I don't understand it, but maybe Georgetown will bounce back from that, because that's a real ugly loss. So maybe they'll be pissed and they'll come in and show up and play a good game against Villanova. That is possible. So I would not want to lay the points with Villanova here. I would probably actually lean to taking them with Georgetown. Villanova, they just had a nice win over Providence to end a losing streak, but I don't think that's going to be a win that's going to get them like overconfident because Providence hasn't been good this year. But they do also have Marquette up next in 4 days, so they might actually slightly look ahead to Marquette and might be looking at how Georgetown's been struggling recently and maybe not take them totally seriously. I don't know. So slight lean to Georgetown plus the points in that one, just based on the situation, even though the line looks like it's suspicious. And in that case, it would tell you that you maybe should be looking to the Villanova side. But as far as the situation is concerned, I would not really agree with that. Rutgers is at Penn State. Penn State is laying up to 7 now. Really, it's more 6.5, 7 with reduced juice. The odds makers, again, are telling you something here. They're telling you Penn State is the better team over Rutgers. 61% of tickets, 88% of the cash on Penn State. So more of the money coming in on Penn State as well. I think both of these teams are kind of not in the greatest spots, though. I mean, Rutgers is coming off a couple of big wins over UCLA, and then after that, they upset Nebraska on the road as a pretty substantial underdog, and that was a game where I played Nebraska, and I lost on that one, too. Not fun. Thought it was a bad spot for Rutgers having to go on the road. Thought it was a nice bounce-back spot. Nebraska playing pretty well at home, and Nebraska did not do it at all. So Rutgers is coming off 2 huge wins in a row. Second straight road game now at Penn State, and they got Michigan State up next. I don't know that they're really going to overlook Penn State, although Penn State struggling in conference play at 2-5, although their overall record is good. Odds makers still telling you Penn State is the better of these two teams. Penn State, though, I don't think I can come in and lay the points with Penn State either, because they're coming off 2 big, tough games in a row. Really 3 big games in a row, though that explains why their conference record isn't that good, because they've already played Illinois, Oregon, and Michigan State, and they did beat Purdue, by the way. That was a huge win for them, which I was on Penn State in that one. Thought it was a nice spot to fade Purdue. But Penn State, yeah, I mean, they got blasted by Illinois, like really embarrassing loss, and they bounced back real nicely from that, which I took Penn State in this one against Oregon, and they did cover for me by 1 point, so I'll take it. Thought they should have potentially won the game, but they played Oregon, took them right to the wire, and then they turned around and they played another good game at Michigan State, only losing by 5. Although they were losing the whole game, they put in a huge effort and never went away. Kept the game close this whole time, so not really a spot where I want to play Penn State either here, even though, yeah, I know they're looking for conference wins right now, so I mean, if you force me, maybe I would still slightly lean to laying the points with Penn State here just because Rutgers isn't in a great spot either, having to go on the road again, a second straight road game, moving all over the place, and Rutgers is definitely the worst of these two teams. Also, Penn State likes to speed the game up significantly, I believe, and I don't think Rutgers likes to play that style of game, so gun to my head, I would lean slightly to laying the 6.5 with Penn State, but that is not going to happen. I'm not going to do it. And that is it for college basketball, man. No plays for me in college basketball. NHL, we got some games here. I mean, my Boston Bruins are a huge favorite against San Jose. Just hopefully the Bruins just don't embarrass themselves, man. But I'm not holding my breath. Bruins very public. I don't really see much of a situational angle here, but the Bruins down from minus 255 to minus 248. 92% of tickets, 95% of the cash on, but they're very public, and there has been some movement on the line against them, so yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit worried about the Bruins, to be honest. I don't want to have anything to do with that situation. I don't really know if there's really much going on here. I mean, San Jose's in the middle of a road trip, so maybe they'll be tiring out kind of towards the end of the road trip. They're out on the East Coast already now, but the Bruins have also been out in the East. I think they just went to Ottawa and lost, blowing the game and losing in a shootout. That's a tough loss for the Bruins as well. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about that game. Minnesota and Colorado is a big game. The odds makers are telling you, as I've been saying, I think Minnesota is an overrated team. I don't think they're as good as their record makes it look. Colorado's a huge favorite at home, so the odds makers are telling you that as well. Colorado's up from minus 220 to minus 221, but public, 69% of tickets and 64% of the cash. So in this situation, though, even though I do think it looks almost too easy to take Minnesota as a dog in this one, although the public actually seems to be coming in on Colorado anyway. So I don't know, but the public doesn't usually get too involved in some of these hockey games. Maybe this one more so because it is a day off for people, and it is one of the bigger matchups of the day. But the situation would have me leaning to Minnesota on this one, even though I agree Minnesota is the significantly worse team, and I think the line is justified in this one. But Colorado's coming off a big win over Dallas. They played Edmonton the game before that and blew a 3-0 lead to Edmonton. I'd mentioned I didn't know how Colorado was going to bounce back from that, and they did, and they beat Dallas. Huge win. Now they got Minnesota, and Minnesota, back on January 9th, they went to Minnesota and beat them 6-1. So because they did that, they just wrecked Minnesota in Minnesota's own place. They might actually overlook Minnesota when it's surrounded by games like this, and they got Winnipeg up next, which is another huge game in 2 days. So Colorado might actually not have full focus on this game, as weird as that sounds. Minnesota coming off a real ugly-looking loss, which is a game where there are a lot of fights going on. It got a bit dicey in that game at Nashville. Nashville wrecked them. Nashville's not as bad as their record indicates, as I have kept saying. Nashville, I don't understand how their record is as bad as it is, because they are a fairly talented team. They're not that bad. But Nashville just wrecked Minnesota and dealt them their third straight loss. Minnesota had lost to Vegas and Edmonton in the games before that. Kind of tough travel spot as they've been kind of moving all over the place. At Vegas, then back home, then out on the road again to Nashville. Now I know it's still a tough travel spot going to Colorado, but after that Nashville debacle, I think Minnesota's probably the right side in this one. Fleury also played in that game against Nashville, and I've never really been a fan of Fleury. I don't think he's really that good. Gustafsson is the better of their two goalies here. Gustafsson, he should be back in net for this one. They've been alternating between them both, but Gustafsson has been like their primary goal, and I think he's going to be back in net for this one. So the slight lean would be to the Minnesota side in that one. I would say you should probably take the puck line in that one if you're going to take that one. My one hockey play is right here up next, 4 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm going to take the Buffalo Sabres plus 1.5, or plus 1.5. No, not on the puck line. Plus 105 on the money line, excuse me. Seattle's down from minus 125 to minus 115. The market has shifted percentage-wise because I did see the cash percentage actually on Seattle a little while ago, but I was like, I'm just going to play the situation here and hope the market evens out, because I did see the line to move down on Seattle, which it has from minus 125 to minus 115, but now they have 56% of tickets and only 54% of the cash. I mean, the public's not going to come in and try to take Buffalo in this game, I would not imagine. Seattle, I think, is in a bad spot here, so that's why I'm going to fade them. Seattle, they're coming off a huge win over Los Angeles over the Kings, and that was a bad spot for Seattle because they were returning home from a road trip, man, and they had played a close game against Winnipeg to finish the road trip. And, you know, I always say when you're on a long road trip like that, you return home, it tends to be an unfocused spot. You have to get back to family life. You have stuff to do at home, but they were facing a big opponent, and they got the job done. And they beat L.A. In L.A., I don't know if L.A. was in the greatest spot either. I mean, L.A. had just clobbered Vancouver after playing a tough game against Edmonton, so L.A. may have not been in the greatest spot either. Were they in a back-to-back, too? I don't remember. No. They were 2 games in 3 days, so both teams were doing that. But LA was kind of towards the end of a road trip as well, so they were kind of tiring out at the end of the road trip would be my guess. So I'm not going to put that much stock into that Seattle win, even though it was in a bad spot for them, sure. But then who does Seattle have up next? Well, they got Washington, who has, I believe they might have the best record in hockey now. So that might very well be a look ahead, even though that is an Eastern Conference team. I don't really see Seattle focusing on Buffalo, especially because they just beat Buffalo in Buffalo on January 11th, 6-2. So just like I said with Minnesota, so Minnesota has a little bit of a road reversal revenge angle there against Colorado because Colorado went into their house and absolutely embarrassed them. Same thing here. Seattle went into Buffalo during that road trip and embarrassed them 6-2. So I think Seattle may very well overlook Buffalo in this spot between two better teams and a team that they already just smacked on the road, whereas Buffalo, I think they're going to be focused here, man. They're going to want some road revenge of their own here for what Seattle did to them in their own place. Buffalo's coming off that ugly loss to Pittsburgh, where I played Pittsburgh in that game. Buffalo had beaten Carolina the game before that to bounce back from that Seattle game, by the way. So it was a bad spot for Buffalo coming off that huge win over Carolina. They got caught in the letdown spot. It wasn't quite as bad as it looked, I guess, because they did give up that empty netter to Nedeljkovic, the goaltender in that game. Crazy. First goalie ever to have an assist and a goal in a hockey game. Insane. So now I think Buffalo's kind of in the bounce back spot. And better than that, they get to start a road trip here. And when you lose ugly at home like that, one of the best things for you is you get to just go out on the road, forget about what you're hearing at home. Just don't listen to the press. The press is going to be all about the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo anyway. So Sabres probably tired of hearing that. Like, they're being overlooked probably substantially because the Buffalo fan base, is all about the Bills here. They don't care about this awful Sabres team. So the Sabres probably don't like being the ugly stepchild there in Buffalo. So I think it's good that they just get to get out of town, focus on hockey, and they get to play this Seattle team that embarrassed them on their own ice. I like Buffalo in this spot, man. And Buffalo has played fewer games in the stretch, man. Since that Seattle game, they had 3 days off after that Seattle game, and they've only played 2 games since then, whereas Seattle has been on the road, I believe. And how many games did they play in that stretch? Let me see. Since they played Buffalo, they played 4 games in that stretch, whereas Buffalo has played, 3 or 2? So Seattle's had the more jam-packed schedule there as well. So Buffalo should be the better rested team coming into this. Give me the Buffalo Sabres in that game. And then as far as the other hockey games, not a whole lot else going on. Vegas is returning home from a road trip, so arguably not a great spot for them. I mean, I think the public sentiment is going to be, well, they're going to bounce back because they just lost to Chicago. That's a terrible loss. But again, when you're returning home from a road trip, it tends to be a little bit of a distraction. This one was less than a week, though, so maybe it'll be less concerning than if it was a longer road trip. But there's no way I'd lay the points with what's going to be a very public Vegas team. St. Louis started the road trip and didn't get off on the right foot, losing to Utah, so they might be in kind of a bounce-back mode here. Vegas, very public, up from minus 195 to minus 196. 94% of tickets, 99% of the cash. Probably not accurate, but that Vegas team is going to be public. The sentiment is, they're back home, they're going to bounce back. If I had to lean in that one, it would be to look towards taking the St. Louis puck line or something to that effect. Tampa and Toronto is one of the big games on the slate here. This is a good one, and I don't really know how to gauge this one because both teams are on a roll right now and beating some kind of inferior teams. Tampa beating Anaheim close in a return home spot, though, so they almost got caught. And then they beat Detroit easy, 5-1. Now they're starting a road trip, so when you start a road trip, like I say, you're pretty much always going to be focused when you start a road trip, and they're taking some momentum out on the road with them. So I think it is a positive for Tampa. Toronto did just go out on the road. They'd beaten New Jersey, which is a huge win in overtime. Then they went up to Montreal and beat them as well, 7-3. Just annihilated Montreal. Big original 6 game there for them. Now they're returning home from that. So I would probably say, even though, they're going to be focused on Tampa here, I think the fact that Tampa is starting a road trip and maybe their win over, who was it again? Detroit is a little bit less significant than Toronto, Montreal. I mean, there's always kind of that rivalry there. Montreal's been playing a bit better recently, that original 6 phenomenon going on there. So I actually would lean to taking the money line with Tampa as an underdog. But this line has actually crashed on Toronto, down from minus 132 to minus 106. So some market agreement with me on that one on the Tampa side. I don't have a strong feeling about that one, but I do agree with it with Tampa. Toronto's public, 74% of tickets and cash. I think they do have the better record of these two teams, but in this spot, I do think it is a pretty nice spot for the Lightning to go in there and maybe catch Toronto. But I expect both teams will still probably show up in that one and be focused. And Carolina and Chicago, this is a weird one because both teams are off beating Vegas. So it's like, does that mean both teams are in letdown spots? Well, I think the team that's more likely to be in a letdown spot is the better of the two teams, right? Because they're the team that's more likely to overlook the opponent. And Carolina just beat Vegas. Now they have to go to Chicago. It is starting a road trip, but they do have Dallas up next. And it's only a 2-game road trip. So it is kind of a sandwich spot for Carolina. So that would have me looking to take the Chicago side. But Chicago also just beat Vegas. And they did it 2 days ago rather than 3 days ago. So that's a huge win. So the question for them is, are they going to have enough left in the tank here because I don't think they're going to, it's not like they're not going to show up against Carolina. I mean, a team like Chicago, they're just trying to get wins wherever they can. So when they have a big opponent coming into their house, yeah, they're going to be focused. So the question is, will Chicago be out of gas? And then the question on Carolina's side is, will they overlook Chicago? Because they have it surrounded by much bigger games for them. So that's the question you need to answer. Carolina's up from minus 275 to minus 295, laying a giant road price here. 57% of the tickets and only 54% of the cash. So if you do like Chicago, you can probably get them at a pretty crazy puck line. You can probably get them even at plus 2.5 goals or something like that if you want to. And with Carolina, who kind of plays more of a defensive style, that might not be a horrible way to look in that game. Not going to be a play for me, though. Excuse me. And I think that's going to pretty much do it. I won't talk about every one of these games. NBA, I got 2 plays in the NBA. The first game up, my first instinct here, Dallas at Charlotte, was I want to look to fade Dallas here because Dallas, they pulled off that huge win for me against Oklahoma City. And this was a Dallas team that we know they're without Luka. They did have Irving back in that game, so that definitely helped. Kyrie was back in that game. In that game, I faded Oklahoma City because Oklahoma City was coming off that huge, absolute murder of the Cleveland Cavs in revenge as well. That was a giant win for Oklahoma City on national TV, and they embarrassed Cleveland completely. So I thought Oklahoma City, and it was a back-to-back after that. I'm like, yeah, there's no way Oklahoma City is going to be in any great spot here at all. So I faded them, and I took 8.5 with Dallas in this one, and the line wound up crashing to 2.5 because Oklahoma City actually decided to rest SGA as well, Gilgeous-Alexander. So I got the best of the number. Dallas still came through, and they won outright. Irving, like I said, did wind up playing in the game, so that helped them as well. But now Dallas coming off beating Oklahoma City. Now they have to go on this 1-game road trip to Charlotte, who not a very good team. And they got Minnesota and then Oklahoma City again and Boston all up in the next 3 games. So to me, it looks like it's a spot where they might overlook Charlotte. So my instinct was, got to look to potentially play Charlotte in this game. Charlotte, I don't think they're necessarily in a spot where I want to actually play them, though, and that's the problem, because they just went out on a road trip, and I think they probably did go out to the Pacific Coast, only to realize their LA games are going to be fire postponed. So they've been out on the road for over a week. They did wind up playing 3 games on the road trip, but they've been away from home for a long time, and as I always say, when you return home from a road trip, it does tend to be a bit of a distracted spot, especially they have an extra day off in here, and I don't think the extra day off actually helps, especially when you won the last 2 games on the road trip and you're rolling. It can cut that momentum a little bit, and it can hurt as far as the distraction angle because you start getting settled in at home and getting more stuff to do. I don't think they're really going to overlook Dallas. I mean, they're the Western Conference champs from last year, but they are without Luka. So even though I do think it is still a worse spot for Dallas, I can't play Charlotte in this spot. So I'm going to pass on this game. Dallas is actually up from 3 to 4.5. I did see it, I think, a little bit higher than that. I think I might have seen it up at 6 at one point. They do have 64% of tickets, but 71% of the cash is agreeing with me, grabbing the side of the Hornets. And again, that is the side that I still lean with, but in a return home spot, I cannot do it. So I will just pass on that one. I am going to play the next game up, which is going to be a play on the Detroit Pistons plus 8. Or maybe 8.5 you can get right now, whatever the best number. It's not a huge difference between 8 and 8.5, but looks like it's dropped a little bit from 8.5 to 8 on the Rockets. I know I'm fading a hot Houston Rockets team, but I think the Pistons are a bit under the radar, man. They're much improved from last year. They're a competitive team, so I like the spot, which I'll explain in a minute. 70% of tickets and only 52% of the cash on the Rockets, so they're public and they're getting less of the cash than the ticket percentage. Excuse me. So I like seeing that. Detroit, I think Detroit is in a positive spot, man, because they just lost multiple games at home to finish their homestand. Actually, they got swept on the 2-game homestand. Now they get to go out on the road. I think that's a positive. When you're not doing well at home and things aren't going well for you, you just get out of there. And plus, just kind of like what I said with Buffalo, what's the Detroit media talking about right now? They're talking about the Lions. The Lions are the flavor of the week, even though I know the Lions just lost. But that's probably all the media is talking about. Detroit Lions overshadowing the Pistons. I think the Pistons are going to want to try to get out of that shadow and maybe even give the city something to cheer for, especially after the Lions lost. So I think Detroit might have extra motivation for that reason as well. And like I said, when you get on a home, you get to forget about the media. You start a road trip. You get to focus just on basketball, and you get to leave all that garbage at home behind you, all those distractions behind. So it's kind of an anti-distraction spot when you start a road trip. So I like that angle as well. And with those 2 losses, Detroit just became a 500 team again. And I think when you're sitting at 500, that's a slight extra mental motivator as well, because you don't want to drop below 500. You don't want to be a losing team. So you're going to have a little bit extra motivation for that reason as well. And of course, it's the Houston Rockets. They're going to be focused on a hot Houston Rockets team, a Rockets team that's been one of the best teams in the Western Conference, frankly. And Houston, they are in a spot where I want to fade them. They're returning home from a road trip, and they have just been playing really nice basketball for the most part, winning most of their recent games. The road trip wasn't that long, but they've still been away since January 15th, so they are still returning home from a road trip. So that is still a distraction angle, even though it was a bit of a shorter road trip. The road trip took them into elevation where they beat Denver, and then they had to go out to the Pacific Coast, played a tough game against Sacramento, where I got away with that one and won on Sacramento in a game where Sacramento repeatedly blew the game. Houston put in a huge effort there, didn't go away, and then they smacked Portland to finish the road trip. Now they're returning home, and they get this Detroit team that's not really that good in the return home spot. Houston may have stuff to do at home. They may overlook this Detroit team a little bit. May have the return home distractions coming into play. And who does Houston have up next? Oh, yeah, they have 2 games against Cleveland up next, starting in 2 days, and then they got Boston after that. So those are much, much bigger games. So it almost makes this like a sandwich spot because it's a return home distraction spot on one side, and there's a big game up next on the other side. So give me the Detroit Pistons plus all these points in that one. That's that play. Minnesota and Memphis is a weird one. Memphis is up from 3 to 5.5. I'm not going to play this game, but 75% of the tickets are on the T-Wolves and only 57% of the cash. So the T-Wolves are looking like a public underdog here, and you never really want to play a public underdog. I apologize for my voice. Like I said, as you know, I've been sick, but my voice has been dead for like over a month. I'm RFK Jr. now, man. I apologize. And I ran out of water, too. And I don't want to get up the stream and go back when I'm like almost done, so I can go and get more water. So again, public road underdog is usually not a team you want to be on. So I would not really want to be taking Minnesota here. Minnesota just played a pretty tough game against Cleveland where they played them to within 7. So that is not great either. They did just lose to Memphis at home, though. So they might still have a little bit of motivation because Memphis just beat them on their own floor. So they may still want to show up and play well against Memphis. We know Memphis has been pretty hot. They've been playing pretty well as well, but they have been without Morant. So you got to make sure that what the injury situation is. Memphis won their last 2 games easily, but now they're returning home from a road trip. So they're not in a very good spot either. I mean, they just went out on that road trip, and yeah, they beat Minnesota on that road trip as well. So again, does that mean they're going to overlook Minnesota coming back home? I don't know, man. I think it is a bit of a distracted spot. They have an extra day off in there, and that might throw off that momentum from beating San Antonio twice in a row. They were without Morant in that second of those 2 games, I believe. And now I don't know if he's going to be back in this game. That's something you got to look at and see if he is going to play. It looks like he's a game-time decision. So that's something to take a look at. Gobert looks like he's also a game-time decision on the side of Minnesota. So that inside presence there for them. So this is a tough read. I think both teams are not in very good spots. So obviously I'm going to pass on this game, but interesting angles coming into play in this game, but no play for me in this one. And Minnesota does not have any, or Memphis, does not have any big game up after this. I think it was Charlotte or something. So they're not going to be looking ahead at the very least. My final play of the day is the Knicks -6.5. And I know you do have to watch and see if Towns is going to play in this game, but I think this line is kind of indicating that there's the potential that he's not going to play in this game, although he has like a finger injury, and I think he did practice, so it seems like maybe he will come back in this game. But I think if he does, this line can only move up a little bit further, although if he's an out's out, maybe the line will drop a little bit, but still, I mean, I don't know, man. You got Hart as a game-time decision as well. Robinson is out, but still, you got to pay attention mostly to the Towns injury and see what happens with that. Trae Young, also a game time decision on the Atlanta Hawks side. So, yeah, I know there are injuries to be aware of here, but I just think the spot sets up for the Knicks. And I don't know if I envision this line dropping any further on the Knicks. I think the price is decent at below the key 7, the 3-score threshold, like I mentioned earlier in the video, where teams stop intentionally fouling. And, of course, you know what I'm going to say. If you know how I play, you know how I make plays here. The Atlanta Hawks just won in overtime 2 days ago at the Boston Celtics. I mean, that is a huge win. So even though, yeah, the Knicks are a pretty good team, but the Knicks have been struggling a bit recently, and Atlanta's coming off a monster win as double-digit underdogs, taking the Celtics into overtime and beating them. I mentioned I thought the Celtics were in a bad spot again in that one. I thought they were potentially going to overlook their opponent again in that one, and they did. The Hawks have been able to beat the Celtics multiple times in Boston, man. It's just bad. But now I think a third straight road game coming off that huge high, huge effort, which also went into overtime, playing against a good defensive Knicks team. I don't like it. And the Knicks are coming off a real embarrassing loss where they were a favorite at home against the Minnesota T-Wolves. And that was, I think, Act 2 of the battle of the trade, basically, between Karl Anthony Towns and Randall there. And I think Towns might have been out in that game. So Towns didn't actually play in the battle of the trade there, and the Knicks got their doors blown off as a pretty big favorite, I think. So that's an embarrassing loss, man. When you lose by almost 20 or whatever on your own floor, actually they're only a 2.5-point favorite, but still, you lose like that at home, that's pretty embarrassing, man. So I expect a big bounce-back effort from the Knicks in this one after that game. They have multiple days off to try to recover from that, and they're not traveling anywhere and just staying at home. So Knicks are in a bounce-back spot. Hawks are in a major letdown spot. Lay the points with the Knicks in that one. 6.5 or whatever the best number is you can get on that. And, excuse me, I think that's going to be it for those plays. Cleveland is facing Phoenix. I mean, Cleveland is returning home from a road trip, and they just faced some pretty tough opponents there, losing to OKC. They beat Indiana the game before that, and they beat Minnesota to finish the road trip. Returning home to face Phoenix, although Phoenix has been hot recently, so I don't know that Cleveland's really going to overlook them, but return home spot like this, although it wasn't that far for them geographically, and it was less than a week-long road trip, so it's not like the worst road trip return spot, but it is still a road trip return spot, so I don't want to play Cleveland in this one. Phoenix has a couple of wins against some not very good teams, really. I mean, Detroit's a decent team, but Phoenix was able to beat them. Phoenix kind of just continuing momentum into this game, so the slight lean would be to taking the points with the Suns in that one, but obviously there's no way I'm doing that. Cavs up from 7.5 to 8, 83% of tickets, 86% of the cash right now, but you know the Cavs are going to be the public team in that one at the very least. Then you got my Boston Celtics after that embarrassing loss are going out on the road to face Golden State, and I think this is a bounce-back spot for the Celtics again. Whenever they get totally embarrassed like that, and they get to go out on the road and start a road trip, you tend to get pretty good focus from the Celtics, so I think they will be focused in this one. They're up from 6 to 10 right now, which seems like a crazy high line, but, I mean, the Warriors, they're an aging team, man. I mean, they haven't really been playing that well. 88% of tickets, 90% of the cash on the Celtics. I do think you're going to get focus out of the Celtics here, so I would only look the Celtics way, but laying 10 is a bit pricey, so I'm not going to do it. And, of course, Golden State's still going to try to show up and be focused on this game. Golden State just returned home and they didn't play well against Washington in that return home spot. So that was a bad spot for Golden State, as I mentioned. I liked taking the points with Washington in that one. I didn't do it, but Washington did actually cover in that one. Golden State didn't play that well, and now it's that second game home after kind of a lackluster performance in the return home spot. So Golden State is in a bit of a positive spot as well here. You got to look at the injury situation, and I believe Draymond Green is out in this game, but it looks like Curry might play in this one, so it's a very difficult read. Both teams should be focused. I'm not going to play it. And then Jazz Pelicans. I mean, this is a rematch of a game that just happened where I think New Orleans was 11.5 or 12 in that one, and they are again. They covered in that game, but now it's got to be Utah that's going to be the team that makes the adjustments, right? So I kind of expect Utah to kind of bounce back from that one. They're the team that's going to have the adjustments to make. Meanwhile, New Orleans might overlook Utah after beating them that first time in covering, and they got Milwaukee and Memphis up next, which are bigger opponents. So it is possible that the zigzag does happen in this one, although the line hasn't really changed since the first game. It's actually down from 12 to 11, though. 63% of tickets, 67% of the cash on the Jazz in this one. So I don't want to play it, but I would slightly lean to grabbing the points with Utah in this one. Although this New Orleans team, I mean, they're laying that many points now because they're an almost intact team now. They're really only without Brandon Ingram now. In that last game, they had basically everybody else was back. McCollum, Murphy the third, Zion. I think Murray was back as well. So basically everybody else is there for them at this point. So this is a fairly under the radar New Orleans team. It's just I don't think the spot is very good for them in that one. Even though, yeah, I think, on the surface, it looks like too many points to be laying with a Pelicans team with a real bad record. But that's the way I would look there. And then the Clippers are coming off beating the Lakers in the battle of the fire-torn LA teams. Pretty huge win for the Clippers, really. I mean, that's always a rivalry. And that was yesterday. So they're in a back-to-back, and they have Boston up next. So it looks like kind of a sandwich spot for the Clippers to me. So I would lean to the Bulls in this one, but the Bulls also played yesterday in Portland, and they're having to travel. But at the very least, they did lose pretty ugly to Portland, so it could be a bounce-back spot for the Bulls here. But they are playing a third game in 4 days, all in different cities, which is a little bit difficult to do. But slight lean still to the Bulls in that one. And I don't even see it. Oh, it's under the extra games. I guess this game was it rescheduled because of the fire? I don't know. But it's under the extra games here. Clippers laying 6. They get 79% of tickets, but 70% of the cash coming in agreement with me on the Bulls. So that's the way that I look at those games. College football championship. I don't know if I have a whole lot to say about this game, to be honest. Ohio State playing Notre Dame, obviously. Ohio State's down from 9.5 to 8.5. They are a bit public. 68% of tickets and cash, which kind of surprises me because I would think that the way the public tends to look at these championship games and watch what these teams have done recently, they like that both these teams have been playing pretty well, and they're going to look at those most recent games and say, oh, man, Notre Dame beat Ohio State, and Notre Dame beat, hopefully I'm not projecting something there. Am I anticipating the future? No, because I don't actually agree that Notre Dame's going to win this game. Notre Dame beat Penn State. That's a huge win, right? Yeah, I mean, it is. Of course it is. And then Ohio State beat that lackluster-looking Texas team. So I actually think the public would kind of give Ohio State less credit for beating Texas, who hasn't looked good on offense. But I think Ohio State's path to get here has been way more difficult than Notre Dame. And to me, it seemed like a line where the public would look at that and think, well, Ohio State beating Texas isn't that huge. Notre Dame beating Penn State is huge. And Notre Dame beat Georgia as well. So to me, although Ohio State beating Oregon is also very huge, of course, but I would think that the public would think this is a competitive matchup and want to take the points here in what they think is going to be a closer game. So my first lean was kind of like, well, I kind of lean to Ohio State, and I still do because they're the better team. The odds makers are telling you they're the significantly better team, and I think they're the better team on basically in every phase of the game, on both defense and offense. Notre Dame really can't throw the ball, so if they fall behind, they don't really have ways to catch up. And I know I've said that in a couple other games, but Notre Dame has not been a big underdog like this. I don't think they've been an underdog of this amount the entire season, man. They've mostly been a favorite all season. So I think they're not really used to this. And Georgia and Penn State, those were close lines, like 1.5 either way. We know there were some issues going on both in both those games. Georgia, they were without their starting quarterback, we know, and they were making boneheaded mistakes in that game. Kirby Smart was being not so smart in that game, so Georgia really kind of just threw that game away. So I don't know that win was really that impressive for Notre Dame. And then Notre Dame was definitely on the verge of losing to Penn State multiple times. And what happened? Drew Aller, or Allar, however you pronounce his name, threw that absolutely horrendous interception. I mean, he made a couple of really crucial mistakes in that game. That is awful. And I don't know that we're going to see the same thing out of Will Howard, man. I mean, Will Howard is the real deal. He is the way better of these two quarterbacks here. I know Riley Leonard has made some good plays throughout the playoffs, but he's not a great quarterback, man. He's not going to be able to put the entire offense on his shoulder like Will Howard will be able to if he really needs to, although I don't even think he's going to need to. So I think Ohio State's path is actually much more impressive, beating a legit Tennessee team and annihilating them, annihilating Oregon, who's, even though I didn't think Oregon was the actual number one team, they're still a very good team. Huge win there. And then Texas, like I've been saying, I think they still might be the top defense or one of the top defenses. So Ohio State beat them too. And yeah, Notre Dame is another one of the top defenses, but I think Texas's defense might actually be better. And I think Ohio State's defense is also better. So I think Ohio State's path has been way more impressive than Notre Dame's has. So I like what Ohio State has done. I don't know how Notre Dame's going to respond now being a big underdog for the first time, because the odds makers are finally telling you they've met like a match where they're actually facing a team that can really actually beat them. So I think you got all that going on here. And again, like I said, if Ohio State has the lead, Notre Dame, they're mostly a rushing offense. They have a really good rushing attack, but they can't really throw the ball to catch up if they fall behind. Those last two games that didn't happen, they were able to stay in the game. If Ohio State gets up by a couple scores, it's going to be difficult for Notre Dame to try to come back in this one, man. Ohio State, they can beat you in any way. They can run the ball, they can throw the ball, and their defense is very good and super fast as well. I know Notre Dame's got a physical defense as well, but both these teams do. I do think Notre Dame has a coaching edge, but that's really the one. That's like the only edge here. They have, I already forget the dude's name, their coach there, but he's definitely a good coach. And Ryan Day, I don't necessarily trust him. But I think in this spot, I mean, Ohio State is just a significantly better team. So I do lean that way. And I lean to the under. It's sitting at 45.5. And I know it seems weird, again, with leaning towards the favorite covering, but also leaning towards the under. But that's just kind of the way I see the game kind of playing out. 69% of tickets, 88% of the cash on the over, though. But I don't really agree with it. I mean, you're looking at two teams that play good defense, two teams that run the ball really well. Notre Dame's definitely going to try to slow the game down if they're going to try to stay in this game. So in a way, though, if you like Ohio State, you kind of want this game to actually be higher scoring. But I'm not quite sure that I see it playing out that way. Although I know this is not like the Super Bowl, where the Super Bowl tends to be a very under type of game, whereas the college football championship tends to be less like that because college is so offense-oriented. But in this game, again, Notre Dame is way more defense-oriented than offense. Ohio State's very good on both. So you do have one offense that may not be able to hold up their end of the bargain here. And the sneaky way that I might play this, it might be the best way to play this, would be to play the first quarter under, if you can get under 10, although you might have to pay extra for it. You probably have to pay like a little bit of a price for it, maybe even up to like minus 130 or something. So I know it's a little bit pricey, but obviously 10 is a very key number because it's a touchdown and a field goal. So first quarter under makes sense, or maybe even first half under, because if you look at what these teams have done throughout the playoffs, both teams have been involved in games that were very low scoring early in the games. So that's been the case on both sides. And you might get a bit of a like feeling out process early on. Both teams not wanting to make mistakes early, which that's kind of how I handicap Super Bowls most of the time. Not as much so with college, but I think in this case, it is the way that I would look at this game. So I think that's going to do it, man. I mean, that's those are my thoughts on that game. Slight leans to Ohio State minus the points and to the under, but I think maybe the best way to play that is one of those early unders, first quarter or first half, or maybe even like a Notre Dame team total under in the first half or something like that. That's going to do it, man. No plays. I mean, sorry to disappoint you. No plays on the college championship, but I don't force myself to have action on every single game. So I do have action today in a few games. Buffalo Sabres plus 1.5 in hockey. Detroit Pistons plus 8 in NBA. And New York Knicks minus 6.5, or I guess kind of line watch that one and make sure that, I mean, at least getting below 7 in that one, I think is the way you want to look at that one. That's going to do it for me. Tower Gang Toad, of course. You can follow me on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. Give us some support. You get live pre-show, post-show, and we're the most hilarious, offensive podcasts ever to exist. So a lot of reasons to do that. That's going to do it for me, man. Have a good one, and peace out.